Coronations show us what we hope for in the future. And I know she's up there watching over us. And she would be very proud, Mother. Just 1 minute ago, King Charles said something about Prince William's future in a sad and emotional speech that has left Britain. It was 7 p.m. at Highgrove House, and the fall sunlight was fading across the royal gardens. The country had been told to expect a big announcement, but nobody thought it would sound like a goodbye. Cameras from all over the world were pointed at the small country house, not Buckingham Palace, because this time it wasn't a big royal show. It was something way more personal. King Charles looked weak but calm, walking slowly to the podium with help from a wooden cane. His suit looked too big on him. His hands shaking just enough for the cameras to see. Behind him hung a picture of Queen Elizabeth II, lit softly by a single gold lamp. The symbolism was hard. Thomas, one king's light, quietly passing to another. For over 70 years, I've seen what service means. Charles started, his voice steady, but full of emotion. And no, as time and sickness remind me that I'm only human, I've decided to make sure that service continues through Myson, the Prince of Wales. The words hung in the air, ringing out like a church bell across the living room of every home in Britain. Prince William, watching from Windsor with Catherine next to him, closed his eyes and breathed out slowly. Even through the TV broadcast, it felt like the moment every royal heir is scared of, the one where love on duty finally crashed together. In that one sentence, Charles had said what many people suspected but didn't want to hear. The start of him stepping back from public life and quietly handing over his authority to his oldest son. Outside the palace gates, crowds started jittering. Some cried, some prayed, others just stood quietly, trying to understand what this meant for their king and their future. Stay with me, because what happened after this emotional speech showed the deepest struggle inside the royal family between what they leave behind, loyalty, and the love that connects them all. The horrors before the announcement had been full of worry. For weeks, whispers had been going around through the hallways of Buckingham Palace. Quiet talks between helpers, worried looks from staff, and the small changes in the king's schedule that said more than any official statement could. King Charles had been talked about since early fall. According to palace sources, he had been getting treatment for his lymphatic condition coming back, a struggle he had kept private until now. At first, the palace said the reports were just routine medical checks, but people who knew the king well saw the truth in his eyes. His energy had gotten lower, and even his normally perfect writing had started to shake. Behind the scenes, Prince William had already quietly stepped into his father's shoes. Taking over events and private meetings, Catherine, always calm, became his invisible strength, the peaceful voice that reminded him to breathe between meetings and keep his cool when the pressure got too heavy. Inside Highgrove, the feeling changed from royal grace to quiet reality. The king's private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, described the moment Charles asked for a national speech as the hardest conversation of my career. When asked what he planned to say, the king reportedly said, "I owe my son and my people the truth, not the fake idea of forever." That morning, Queen Camilla tried to talk him out of it. "You don't have to do this now," she said, her tone more desperate than loving. "It will only bring chaos." But Charles had already made his decision. "Better chouse with honesty," he whispered. "Thanzolence without bravery." By the time the cameras were set up at Highgrove, the king seemed ready. He walked through the garden one last time before stepping in front of the world, stopping briefly to touch the rose bushes he and Diana had planted together decades ago. He knew that what he was about to say would change the monarchy forever. And when the broadcast started, silence fell notably over Britain, but across every part of the Commonwealth. Even before Theokin's speech, the people closest to him had felt that something was changing, not just in his health, but in his. For months, King Charles III had quietly fought against exhaustion, pushing through state duties and public appearances, refusing to let but the people around him noticed a change. The way he held his candidature, the way he paused before signing official papers as though even writing took more than his body could give. At Clarence House, his helpers described mornings that started later and meetings that ended sooner. He was still smart, one senior staff member, but his energy was going away. We all knew he was trying to trune time. It was Princess Anne, ever practical and loyal, who first brought up the question that hung unspoken in every royal hallway. What happens if Hecate continued? She had seen this spore, the decline of their mother, Queen Elizabeth II, and the quiet Mestet came with the change. This time, however, there was no hiding the emotion bendit. Charles wasn't just a king. He was a father, a husband, and a man trying to let go with dignity. Behind closed doors, discussions got more. Prince William started attending meetings in his father's place. Staff Woe, once bowed to Charles, now turned automatically to the younger prince for decision. Even the Prime Minister's weekly meeting shifted quietly, still addressed to His Majesty, but more and more involving William's advice. And yet, nobody outside the palace walls knew the truth. Official statements kept describing the king as in good spirits. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla, determined to control the story, reportedly pushed the communication teams to protect the crown, not expose it. One senior staffer later admitted she feared that any hint of weakness would invite questions about her own place in the new order. The tension between duty and denial got worse. Charles, though weak, could feel it too. On October 17th, the day before the announcement, he asked to see William privately at Highgrove House. The two men walked slowly through Theros Garden, where the king leaned on his cane and his son walked beside him quietly. "You've been carrying more than you should," Charles said quietly. But that's what happens when love and responsibility meet. They weigh the same but feel very different. William said nothing, only nodded, his eyes wet. He knew this conversation wasn't about. It was about saying goodbye that evening. As the palace got the cameras ready for the king's national speech, whispers filled newsrooms across London. Reporters from Sky News, BBC, and Reuters all hinted at a possibly an instant about who would be next in line. For the first time in years, the monarchy had gone silent, and silence in Britain is the loudest sound of all. At Windsor, Catherine watched her husband walk back and forth in the study. "He's going to do it," William said, more to himself than to her. "He's actually going to tell the world." Then Lethem Catherine stood up, resting a hand on his arm. "He's not giving you he's giving you his trust," she said softly. When the broadcast started next evening, families across Britain tuned in. Some gathered as families, others alone in bars, airports, and hospitals. People turned towards screens, pulled in by how serious what they were about to see was. The king's image appeared weak, but proud. His words were slow, careful, and clearly final. "As time humbles me," he said, "I've come to understand that strength isn't found in holding on. Middleton, knowing when to pass the torch, a that sentence." The camera briefly caught Queen Camilla's reaction. Her eyes narrowing, her lips pressed into a thin. It was only a second, but enough for viewers to feel the tension behind carefully planned unity. Outside Highgrove crowds had already gathered with candles and flags. When the king finished, the air was thick with shock. Many cried openly. Others clapped quietly, as though sadness and gratitude mixed into one feeling. And Mabu, watching this now, can feel that same mix of sadness and respect. If your father or teacher had to hand over everything he built, his work, his legacy, his identity, could you accept it without being angry? Tell me, in the comments, what city or country are ya watching from tonight? And what does legacy mean to you? Because across every border, one truth stays the same. Love may guide a family, but legacy tests it. And for the royal family, that test hadn't just started. In the hours after the king's statement, Highgrove becameth quiet center of a storm that was sweeping across the world. Every TF network carried the words, "King Charles confirms Prince William as future head of the monarchy." For the first time in modern royal history, a king, who was still ruling, had chosen to publicly hand over moral and working leadership while still alive, an act of humility, and meaning that blurred the line between duty and love. But behind the royal calm of the speech, emotions were running high. Inside the sitting room, at Highgrove, Charles sat quietly. The adrenaline of the speech finally leaving his body, his hands shook slightly as he reached for a cup of tea. "It's done," he said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. His private secretary, Sir Middleton, breathed out deeply, the kind of breath you only let out after months of quiet fear. Across their room, Queen Camilla stood by the window, her back turned. "You didn't have to say it like that," she said, her voice controlled but sharp. "You've made it sound like a farewell." Charles looked upon her. It was Camilla. The crown must outlive the person wearing it. "You know that better than anyone." She turned, her fists hardening. I know what the world will make of it. They'll think you've given up, or worse, that I pushed you to. Then let them think, he replied quietly. History will be kinder, Thangasip. It wasn't anger that filled Therum after that. It was distance. The distance that had started to grow between them over the past months. For all her strength, Camilla had built her life on being close to power. Watching her husband give it up, even symbolically, felt like losing her place beside him. Meanwhile, at Windsor Castle, William and Catherine sat together in stunned silence, replaying the speech. The king's words had been beautiful, but hearing them out loud made the weight of what he inherited very real. William rubbed his temples. He's turned a lifetime into one sentence, he said, and now it's mine. Catherine leaned closer. He hasn't left you a burden. Will, he's left you a chance to lead without breaking. Later that night, William got a call from Princess Anne. Her tone was steady, but there was something raw underneath. He's resting now, she said, but you should know, he's weaker than he shows. That statement, it cost him more than you'll think. William closed his eyes. I know, he whispered. I could see it in his. Anne paused, her voice softening. He's proud of you, you know? He told Meisterday, I've seen my son become the mon. I prayed I could be. The line went quiet for a moment, and in that silence, William felt both comfort and fear. Thedderch had been passed, yes, but it burned brighter and heavier than ever before. In London, political circles were already buzzing. The Prime Minister's office released a form. The government gives its respect to His Majesty, the King, for his wisdom and openness. The crown stays strong under His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, who has the full confidence of the nation. It was a diplomatic way of saying what the world already knew. Britain had entered a new chapter, one not defined by coronations or ceremonies, but by gradual change. At Clarence House, royal advisors met Latinto the night, discussing details. Should there be an official council? Would William now attend private meetings in the King's Place? How would this affect Commonwealth relations? Every question was answered with careful words, but the truth was clear. Nobody had ever done this before, and Thenthor was Camilla. In the days that followed, her silence became louder. She was photographed leaving Highgrove with a stressed expression, her car heading toward Ramel House, her private home. The tabloids jumped on it immediately, with headlines like Queen Camilla's anger after King's statement and Is Britain seeing two thrones? Apollos Helper tried to stop rumors by giving a brief statement. Her Majesties devoted to the King and Continuesto support His Majesty's decisions. But public had already chosen its story, one of quiet heroism for Charles and moral clarity for William, while Camilla's image slipped once more into the shadows. For William, the aftermath was overwhelming. He was now expected to step into every state meeting, handle royal sponsorships, and represent his father's vision while carrying the unspoken worry of losing him. At night, when the cameras were gone, Catherine would find him staring out at Deggart. I just keep thinking, he told her once. I wasn't meant to get it this way. Not yet. Not like this. She placed a hand over his. No one ever is, Will. But you're ready because he believes you. Meanwhile, at Highgrove, Charles sat alone at his writing desk. The house was silent, except for the ticking of an old clock once owned by his mother. He picked up his fountain pen, his hand shaking, and started a letter. My son Dot, when the weight feels unbearable, remember, you're not carrying a crown, you're carrying people. That's the difference between power and purpose. He signed it simply. Dad, when he finished, he placed the letter inside an envelope marked, to be opened when I am gone. Then Hor leaned back, looking toward the window where the evening star had just started to shine. He smiled slightly, whispering words no one else would hear. The future is safe, and for the first time in months, he let himself rest. The next morning, Britain woke up to headlines that hit like thunder. Every major newspaper carried the same image, King Charles sitting before the nation. Weak but firm, announcing that his son would lead where he no longer could. But it wasn't the speech that shocked it was what came after. Just hours later, Queen Camilla's private documents were leaked to the press. A senior palace worker, speaking anonymously, claimed that she had told close friends, the king isn't thinking clearly. He's being pushed into this decision by others. Within minutes, tabloids turned the quote into front-page scandal. Headlines screamed, Camilla questions the king's method. Palace division deepens and war off the Windsors. At Buckingham Palace, the air was electric. Staff rushed between rooms, whispering, deleting, rewriting statements. That communications team debated for hours on whether to deny or ignore the leak, but damage was already done. In the public eye, Camilla had gone from grieving wife to someone trying to take power. At Highgrove, Charles sat by Thundo with the newspaper spread in front of him. He didn't speak for several minutes. Finally, he sighed and said softly, "She's scared, not mean." Power makes good people defensive. Princess Anne, ever direct, replied from across the room. Being defensive isn't same as loyalty, brother. You've done what you had to do. Let the rest office hold the line. That same day, Prince William faced his first test as the unofficial head of the family. Reporters shouted questions as he arrived for a meeting at Clarence House. "Your Royal Highness? Does the Queen disagree with King's statement? Are you getting ready for the throne? Will you respond to the leaks?" William stopped briefly at the steps, his face calm but pale. "My father's health and his wishes stay our family's priority," he said. "We are united, even when the world doubts it." Then, without another word, he entered Red's building. Inside, he found Catherine waiting with a folder of press updates. She had been following every reaction across social media, the wave of sympathy for the king, the praise for William's calmness, the harsh criticism of Camilla. "People see you as their answer now," she said quietly. "Every word you say matters." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion showing on his face. "I didn't ask to be their answer," he said, "but if I don't stay still, we all sink." Meanwhile, at Tramiel House, Camilla's isolation got worse. Reporters camped outside Thegots, shouting her name, flashing cameras through the bushes. Inside, she walked from room to room, phone in hand, ignoring dozens of messages. For the first time in her royal life, she had no control over the story. When her private secretary suggested releasing a statement, she replied coldly, "Anything I say now will sound like an excuse." That night, BBC aired a special called The Transition Within the Crown. The show displayed decades of footage, young Charles beside Elizabeth, 18-age William at Diana's funeral, and finally their faces side by side. During the recent speech, the video ended with the caption, "The father who built the bridge, and the son who must cross it." Across the country, viewers cried, calls powered into radio shows with messages of love and gratitude. "He's doing what no king has dared, letting go while Hestel can," said one listener from Manchester. "That takes guts." At the same hour, Charles and William spoke privately over the phone. The king's voice was quiet but steady. "I hearty've crowned you the sensible one," Charles said, almost smiling. "You gaveth them reason too," William replied. "Then, give them something greater faith. It's all I ever wanted to leave behind." Neither mentioned Camilla, though both knew the wound would take time to heal, for now. The monarchy had survived its first public storm under the new setup, before sunrise. William stood alone in his study, the first light of morning touching his face. On the desk lay two objects, his father's written statement and a framed photo of them together from years ago. Laughing under the rain at Balmoral, he touched the glass and whispered, "I'll carry it, Dad. Just rest outside." The rain started again, soft, constant, cleansing. And as London woke to a quieter day, the image of two generations connected by love, pain, and destiny stayed in every heart. The torch had been passed, not through ceremony, but through sacrifice. In the days after the king's statement and Camilla's remarks, the royal household entered a strange calm, the kind that comes only after a storm. Strong and Otto rearrange everything in its path. Buckingham Palace released no nuclement, no clarifications, no denials. Instead, the royal press office quietly shifted attention toward Prince William and Princess Catherine, who started taking on an even bigger public role. The next royal event, originally planned for King Charles, was suddenly led by William, a visit to a children's showspice in Bristol. The sight of him kneeling beside sick children, holding their hands with a small, caring smile, became the image that defined the moment. The newspapers called it the beginning of the new era. But inside the palace walls, the weight of change was still felt deeply. At Highgrove House, Charles spent most days resting in the garden. His doctors insisted on almost complete break from work, and the king, who had once filled every hour with letters and meetings, now found himself quietly watching the seasons change. Yet there was no bitterness in him, only thinking. "It's strange," he told his doctor once, "to spend decades fighting toe matter and then find peace in giving up." Camilla, meanwhile, stayed at Tramiel House, not seen for days. Her helpers claimed she was recovering from stress, though insiders said she had refused to return to public life until story cooled down. In private, Sheffield betrayed, not just by the palace, but by Charles himself. "He's handed Thanation to William," she was hard telling a friend, "and in doing so, he's raised me." Her withdrawal left a visobliga beside the king, one that Princess Anne naturally filled. Anne visited Highgrove regularly, often joining Arbroath for tea. Together, they talked about everything except the monarchy. "We've both done our part," Anne said. "Afternoon, the rest belongs to them now." Charles smiled slightly. "Yes," he said quietly, "but it's nice to know it's in good hands." At Windsor, William and Catherine felt that same mix of responsibility and quiet wonder. Catherine often found him awake before sunrise, sitting at his desk, surrounded me, meeting folders and handwrittenets. "He's still guiding me," William would say, looking toward a letter from his father pinned on the wall. "Every decision feels like his echo." Public opinion rallied strongly around the news top. Polls showed record approval ratings for William and Catherine, especially among older Brits, who saw in them a reflection of duty softened by empathy. News anchors called them the bridge between tradition and tomorrow. Yet beneath the public grace, William carried an invisible pain. Each day, that filled his father's shoes. He feared that it brought them closer to a final goodbye. "He's still here," Catherine would remind him gently, "just quieter." Now, on October 20th, 3 days after the speech, the palace released His Majesty continues to rest comfortably. At Highgrove House, the Prince and Princess of Wales will represent the crown at upcoming state events. No mention of Camilla, no Tokov giving up the throne, just the slow, steady rhythm of a monarchy, adapting to a new heartbeat. That evening, William made a private visit to his father. The garden glowed with candlelight, and Charles was sitting under an old oak tree, the same spot where he had filmed his first speech as king. When William came closer, Charles looked up and smiled weakly. "It's quieter without the noise," the king said. "It suits you," William replied softly. "It suits the Acron," Charles corrected. "And you'll learn quiet doesn't mean weak. Semetamicites, the loudest form of strength." They sat together for nearly an hour, saying little, watching the night settle over the English countryside. No ceremony, no speeches, just two men connected by blood and legacy, but passing the crown, not through law or ritual. And as the lanterns flickered in the garden, it became clear that his story was already rewriting itself, not as an ending, but as something passed down through the heart. By the time the leaves at Highgrove started to turn orange and gold, Britain had already adjusted to its quiet change. There were no royal celebrations, no big parades, only the soft, respectful tone. King Charles spent his mornings walking slowly through the gardens, his cane tapping softly against the gravel path. He spoke rarely now, but people close to him said he seemed lighter. In letting go, he had found peace. "It's a strange kind of freedom," he told a friend from the Church of England. "The freedom of knowing your purpose is complete." Meanwhile, Prince William and Princess Catherine started to show the new face of monarchy, one built less on grandness and more on grace. Their appearances felt less like royal rule sand, more like real connection. At Onavant, William was asked how his father was doing. He smiled slightly and said, "He's finally taking time to just be." And I think the nation's learning to do the same. Behind that statement was the true legacy of this change. Not the yama of who's next in line, but the abode of humility. Across the Commonwealth, people talked about the king's decision not as an act of weakness, but as a moment of clarity. In a time defined by ambition and endless dream, Charles had offered a rare lesson, that knowing when to step back and be the most powerful form of At a memorial service for late Queen Elizabeth II, later that week, Archbishop Justin Welby reflected on that same truth. "Greatness," he said, "isn't measured by how tightly we hold on to power, but by how willingly we pass it on in love." It was as though he had spoken the ending of Charles's reign. Queen Camilla, still mostly withdrawn from public life. Left Hover off, the change stayed. One evening, Asti got ready for bed. Catherine whispered, "You know, your father didn't just pass you the crown. He passed you peace." William smiled quietly. "Then, I hope I can keep it shining," he said. That night, under the soft English rain, Highgrove House glowed faintly in the distance. Two eras, father and son, existing together in harmony. And beyond this, royal fences. People across Throld found themselves talking not just about kings or titles, but about something way more personal. The courage to let go, and the grace to move forward. Maybe that's the lesson this story leaves behind, that every life, no matter how powerful or ordinary, reaches a moment where holding on to tightly bems the very thing that breaks us. True wisdom is in understanding when to let go, not in defeat, but in faith. In Charles's final act as an active king, he gave the world a lesson in dignity. In William's quiet acceptance, he gave it hope. Together, they reminded millions that the strength of what well of behind isn't measured in crowns, but in compassion. And as Britain steps into its new chapter, one truth stays clear. The crown may sparkle under light, but it lasts because of love. A love that listens, forgives, and if this story moved you, take a moment to share where you're watching from, whether it's London, New York, Sydney, or somewhere in between. What does legacy mean to you in your own life? Don't forget to like this video, leave your thoughts below, and subscribe for more stories, where history meets humanity, where even the most powerful crowns are carried, not worn. Because in the end, every reign, royal or not, is just a journey of learning. When to lead, when to listen, and when to let go.